Hello and welcome. You're watching Republic TV and Republic Business. As we are seeing the geopolitical tensions across the world are rising, protectionism is also on the rise, the tariff war, the trade tension. And amidst all this, how the trade is going to pan out and what role India is going to play. So to discuss more on this, we are joined in by a very special guest, Mr. Ralph Ossa, Chief Economist of the World Trade Organization. Thank you, Mr. Ossa, for joining us and speaking to Republic TV and sparing time out. Thank you so much once again for joining us, sir.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So without wasting much time, Mr. Ossa, just give me a sense, as of now, from a vantage point, how do you see the world trade and what is your outlook going forward?
Look, of course, trade has had a difficult time in the past couple of years. We had the pandemic, we had high inflation, we had contractionary monetary policy, we had contractionary fiscal policy, and so on. But the big picture for me is that trade is really, or has been and continues to be highly resilient. We're now expecting we're expecting the volume of merchandise trade to grow by 2.6% in 2024 and 3.3% in 2025 after having seen a slight contraction by 1.2% in 2023. And if I think ahead, if I think about long-run trends, what we are really looking at is that the future of trade is in services, and particularly in digitally delivered services. So this segment of trade has grown at an average rate of 8.1% since 2005, far outpacing overall trade growth. And this is actually good news for India, because India has traditionally been very strong in this area.
Right. And so when we talk about the outlook, obviously there are some downside risks and the kind of tensions we are seeing across the world, the tariff tensions and the geopolitical tensions as well. What are the top downside risks that you see for the global trade? And as far as India is concerned, what are the downside risks that you see?
I mean, you've already mentioned the geopolitical tensions. That for me is the main downside risk. We already see a fragmentation of trade along geopolitical lines. What we've done, for example, in a recent analysis, we've split the world into two hypothetical geopolitical blocks based on voting behavior at the United Nations General Assembly, an Eastern Bloc and a Western Bloc. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but what you see is since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, you see that trade between these blocks is growing significantly more slowly than trade within these blocs, which suggests that we're seeing more friendshoring than before. And for us, this poses a risk to the global economy. We have undertaken some simulations where we have simulated the worst case scenario of such global fragmentation and found that worldwide real incomes could drop by up to 5% if this really came to pass.
Right. And so I want you to throw attention and how the world sees Indian economy and how the trade prospect of India and the potential of India as far as trade is concerned. So what are your comments as far as India's economy is concerned, as far as trade profile of India is concerned, and what potential do you see for India going forward?
Okay, India is, of course, a very large country. It's a very large economy. It's a very fast-growing economy. And I think this is widely appreciated across the world. A major player also now, as firms are trying to find alternative sources of supply because of the tensions between the United States and China. For me, the main thing really to watch out for when I think about India is digitally delivered services, digital trade. As I said before, this is a very fast-growing segment of international trade. And that's the segment where India is traditionally very strong. And think of computing services, think of accounting services, anything that can be transmitted electronically. So this is really, I think, where I see the future going. But in the medium term, we could also see more manufacturing exports, of course, coming out of India, as some firms are trying to relocate their supply chains away from China.
Right. And so in the recent past, we have been seeing the imposition of tariffs on various countries as far as trade is concerned. We have seen European Union levying the tariff on China. We have seen US levying the tariff on China. How do you see it? And do you think that, and also we have seen that US being more isolationist and protectionist in the last few years as far as trade is concerned. So do you think that this, and we expect it to rise under Mr. Trump. So what are your quick comments on that? And how do you see the protectionism? Do you think that it is on the rise?
I mean, we definitely see international trade under pressure. We see protectionist tendencies in various parts of the world. At the same time, we also see resilient international trade, as I mentioned before. But this is something that we have to be very careful about, because if we want to have an economy, a world economy that is resilient, if we want to have a world economy that pushes for inclusiveness, development, economic security, also sustainability, we do need open and multilateral international trade. So protectionism is really not the way to go. As you know, we've seen it in the 1930s when we had protectionism spiraling where this led us, and this is of course not a place where we want to be again today.
Right, and also, sir, I just want you to throw light on the aspect that India as a country is having its neighborhood, which is very unstable. We have seen that Bangladesh going through a turmoil phase of instability. It's still going on. We have seen it in the case of Sri Lanka, Pakistan. How do you see this geopolitical tension, and how do you see India performing in the middle of all this instability happening around its neighborhood?
I mean, we have, as you said, we have instability in many parts of the world. We have instability in your region. We have the situation in the Middle East. We have the situation in Europe. So wherever you look, we have uncertainty, and uncertainties, of course, not helpful for international trade. The best advice I can give is to really invest in an open and a predictable and also multilateral trading system, because if you have uncertainty, if you have supply shocks coming from various parts of the world, you never know where the supply shock is going to be hitting, and you also never know what trading partner may be able to help you. So really having casting your net widely and not relying on particular trading partners too heavily seems like a good strategy going forward. We saw this, for example, when we looked at African countries in the aftermath of the beginning of the war in Ukraine, when agricultural exports to Africa dropped dramatically because of the war, and what we saw happening is that many of these countries were able to substitute away to substitute towards alternative sources of supply from very, very diverse origins: the United States, Argentina, Europe, and so on and so forth. So really having these multiple outside options, I think, is key in a world of uncertainty.
Right. And so also one thing that everyone is talking about, the US recession, and there are different school of thought. Some people are saying that the US recession is on horizon. Some people are negating this fact. What is your sensing? And if that happens, if US plunges into a recession, what kind of impact you see that will have on the global trade?
We don't have a particular forecast for the United States, but we are obviously also observing these developments closely. A lot will also depend on what the Federal Reserve is doing. You've seen the nervousness, let's put it like that, in financial markets. And given the size of the United States in the global economy, of course, that's also an important determinant of international trade. What we had to worry about more in the past was actually Europe. If I look at the situation in Europe last year, for example, because of high inflation rates and because of high energy prices, that's really what dragged down international trade. So at least for now, we're looking more optimistically towards North America's contribution to international trade.
Right. And so also we have seen that in the last few years, we have seen the Russia-Ukraine war that was going on. And how do you see that war has impacted the trade, and especially in the key sectors like energy and agriculture?
Look, obviously, this trade has this conflict has not been good for the exporting prospects of both countries. When we look at our latest figures, Ukrainian exports are down 18%, Russian exports are down 4%. This is in value terms, I should say, not in volume terms compared to 2019. But what's more significant than that is really the change in the pattern of trade. Russian exports to Europe have really collapsed. For example, Russian exports to Germany are down 94%. And on the other hand, Russian exports to other trading partners have increased substantially, including India, where Russian exports have increased more than eightfold.
Right. And so when we talk about the trade, global trade, and we have seen, and as we have already talked about the rising protectionism, what is your biggest worry as of now when you think about the trade going forward? We all know that there is a geopolitical tension. We all know that the protectionism is on the rise. But even then, what is your biggest worry that is concerning for you?
Look, I think we as a world economy face three major challenges today. The one challenge is we need to maintain peace and security. The second challenge is that we need to reduce poverty and inequality. And the third challenge is that we need to achieve a sustainable economy. And my worry is that more and more people are perceiving trade as being part of the problem as far as overcoming these challenges is concerned. And that's in part what's fueling these protectionist tendencies, whereas really trade is part of the solution. So I think really getting back to a point where people understand the importance of trade to deliver a more secure, a more inclusive, a more sustainable economy, that's really very important. And that's what we're trying to do. We are trying to contribute to. We wrote a whole report last year, trying to make this case and trying to convince people that trade is really a force for good if conducted rightly.
Right, right. And so also we know that US has imposed tariffs on China, European Union has imposed tariffs on China, and there is a clamor for de-risking the supply chain from China. What has been your observation as far as supply chains are concerned? Do you think that there are markers that the world is shifting supply chains from China? And how do you see the impact of these tariff measures, especially US and European Union and China on the global trade?
I mean, we definitely see that. If you look at bilateral trade between the United States and China, it is growing much much more slowly than it would have, without these tariffs in place and without these tensions mounting. That's very clear in the data, and we do see some of these trade flows, of course, being diverted to other countries, and India is one of them, Vietnam is one of them, Mexico is one of them, and to some extent, having a bit of a diversification of supply chains is also not a bad thing, because of course we don't want over-concentrated supply chains. So I think what we really have to be careful about is that we get to a point where people think that making everything domestically, home shoring, reshoring, these kinds of things are the solution, because they are not. I mean, think about the pandemic. Initially, yes, there were supply chain disruptions, but then pretty quickly, I mean, where did all the masks come from? Where did all the home office equipment come from? Where did the vaccines come from? Where did the personal protective equipment come from? And so on. That was all international trade. So yes, international trade can be a source of instability, perhaps in the short run, but then history has shown over and over again that it's really a source of resilience, and I think we really need to protect and preserve that.
Right. And so one phenomenon apart from protectionism that is influencing the trade policies is the decarbonization and climate change. And we have seen that how carbon border adjustment mechanism by European Union has been imposed on the trade. And that's what we are seeing, that fastly and in a very fast-paced manner, decarbonization and climate change are impacting the trade policy. How WTO is trying to strike a balance between climate change and the trade policies?
I mean, the first thing that one has to see, and I think it often gets overlooked, is that international trade is really part of the solution when it comes to climate change. We all know that there's economic gains from trade, and the economic gains from trade come from countries specializing in what they're relatively good at, but there's also environmental gains from trade, and they come from countries specializing in what they're relatively green at. So specialization, according to what we call environmental comparative advantage, actually has the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions substantially, which is why it's so important to be careful that environmental policy measures that are being taken, also trade-related environmental policy measures, are not unnecessarily trade restricting. And that might require some international coordination, for example, on carbon prices, but also on carbon border adjustment mechanisms.
Right. And so one thing is clear about India's thrust area as far as trade is concerned, that Indian government is focusing on boosting manufacturing to boost trade. When you look at India's trade profile, what are the top 3 things that you would like to suggest for India as far as its trade is concerned and as far as ramping up trade with the global world is concerned?
Yeah, I would see 3 things. The first thing I think I've already mentioned a couple of times, which is, build on your strength, and the strength is in the digital economy, and I think you can really benefit tremendously from this trend towards digital trade, towards digitally delivered services. The second one is also, as you already mentioned, of course, India is in a good position now to benefit from some of the relocation of supply chains away from China, for example. So this is clearly something to be aware of and to be open to. But third, I think, is really to continue contributing to protecting and strengthening the multilateral trading system, also in the area of digital trade, because I think India, as big as it is and as important as it is, also stands to benefit from open, predictable, and multilateral trade, as all other countries are in the world, which is why we are so grateful for India's support at the WTO.
Right. And so one issue that we have seen in the global trade prospect is that data localization, digital protectionism, and tech transfer has been some of the issues. How WTO is trying to address these things?
I think there's an audio issue.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, now you're back.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that in the recent past, we have seen, as far as trade is concerned, data localization, data protection, digital protectionism, and tech transfer has emerged some of the key issues. How the World Trade Organization is trying to address these issues?
No, this is a very important trend, and our members have been working hard on these issues along 2 tracks. There's one track, multilateral track, meaning a track involving all WTO member countries, our so-called multilateral work program on e-commerce, where members have been thinking about how WTO rules apply to e-commerce. And one important achievement from the work in that track this year, for example, was an extension of the moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions, which is a cumbersome way of saying that you continue not to have to pay import duties on, for example, your ebooks or other things that you buy online. The second track is what we call a plurilateral track. That's a track not involving all WTO member countries, but a large subset of WTO member countries that have been working towards imposing new disciplines on digital trade. And they just reached an agreement, or something close to an agreement. They call it a stabilized text in some important areas, where they agreed on provisions on e-signatures, provisions on cybersecurity, and so on. The issues that you raised now, data localization, cross-border data flows, that's something that has been postponed to a later stage. But members are clearly working on these issues.
Right. And so one question I just want to ask you, in terms of trade disputes at WTO, which country has the highest cases filed against it? If you can just throw light on this number.
This I don't know off the top of my head, but what I do know is that our dispute settlement system tends to be used more heavily by developed countries as opposed to developing countries, which is also why our members are currently engaged in a reform process of the dispute settlement system in order to make it more inclusive and also more accessible to small countries. Because if you think about it, I mean, what's so great about the WTO really is that it provides a level playing field for all countries. It's really one country, one vote, or it's not really a voting system, it's really a consensus system. But even if you're a small developing country, you really have a strong voice, a loud voice at the WTO. But in order to really engage in the process, you also need to be able to engage in the dispute settlement system, which is why members are working hard at the moment to make this more accessible, also for smaller countries.
And so last two questions I'm just going to ask you. One is that we know that de-risking of supply chain from China is happening across the world. There is a rising clamor for it, be it United States or European Union. And we also have been hearing in the recent past that China plus one is going to benefit India a lot. Right. So I just want to ask you, how do you see it when you compare China and India? What are the things that stands out as far as India is concerned in terms of trade, and how India can emerge as one of the winners from this de-risking of supply chain from China?
I mean, my sense is that India is already emerging as one of the winners, but of course we have to be careful that this relocation of supply chains now doesn't come at the expense of the integrity of the multilateral trading system. And that this is not just a short-run victory for individual countries now that perhaps get economic activity that they wouldn't have received otherwise, but that really we really maintain the integrity of the system, which is why it's important, I think, for India to also fight for the system and continue fight for the system as they are doing.
So, but what stands out as far as India is concerned for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think it's the issues I mentioned. Of course, India is an attractive place now for manufacturing firms that are looking for alternative locations. But not just India. We also have Vietnam. We also have Mexico. I think it depends a lot on the industries. So that is clearly something. But then also, as I said before, even though this is the topic of the day, it's really important not to forget about the long-term objectives or the long-term strengths, and there the whole digital economy, I think, is very important.
Right. And the last question, and a positive question for all Indians: how do you see the future of India economically? And I want you to give your elaborative answer on this. How do you see the future of India economically, and how do you see on the trade front, as far as initiatives that you are seeing, the robust digital economy that you are mentioning about India? How do you see the India performing economically and on the trade front as well?
I mean, India has been growing very quickly over the past years, and of course we all hope and anticipate that this growth is going to continue, and that it is going to continue to improve the living conditions for so many millions and millions of people as it has done in the past. And I also hope that India continues to leverage international trade. See, international trade, I think, in many Western countries at least, has a bad reputation because people think that international trade is bad for inclusiveness. And that's because import competition from countries like China has led to some disruptions in labor markets in advanced countries. But if you think about the Indian experience, if you think about the Chinese experience, you really see the power of international trade to transform lives of millions and millions, billions of people, really. And I really hope and also see India to continue going down its path, and then of course also continue to contribute to the institutions that are underpinning international trade, in particular the World Trade Organization.
Right. And the last questions I would like to take this opportunity to ask you. We have seen that there are a lot of disagreements between the developed economies and the developing economies at WTO regarding a lot of issues. How WTO is trying to resolve all those issues that are emerging between developed and developing economies, whether it's a subsidy, whether it's generic medicines and all that. There are a lot of disagreements on various issues. How WTO is trying to address that the balance remains stable between developed and developing economies?
I mean, you're right. There's disagreements between developed countries and developing countries. There's also disagreements among developed countries and also disagreements among developing countries. It's a complicated process. We have 166 members now, two joined just recently, and it's a consensus-based system. So, of course, finding consensus among these 166 countries is difficult, but it is possible. We have shown in the 13th Ministerial Conference, also the 12th Ministerial Conference, that progress is possible. You just have to be patient, but I really don't see any other option in today's world, because if you really want to make lasting progress and also sustainable progress, you need make sure that everyone is on the same page, even if this takes a little bit longer sometime. But I can say that the voices of developing countries were really heard at the WTO. We had a number of important decisions, also supporting developing countries in our last ministerial conference. I ask that people are patient, but I'm also looking optimistically in the future, and really do believe that an institution like the WTO, because of its inclusiveness, can really play a very important role in supporting the global economy going forward.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Ossa, for speaking to Republic Media Network and sparing your time out for us. Thank you so much once again for sparing time out and speaking to us and throwing light on the critical issues as far as trade is concerned. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.